right there. Hey, thanks a lot. You can have a seat. Thank you for being here today, man. We're glad that you're here. It has been some warm days lately outside, but they're telling us that the early frost is coming next year. In fact, it's only just a few months away, and we're going to have our very first frost out there. Hard to believe it on a day like today. Whenever that happens, my lawn at my house, the grouse immediately goes into dormant mode, and it turns into a light tan, a brown color. It gets really, really dry, and it's kind of that way all the way through winter and up into spring when things start to come to life again. And every time that happens, every year when that occurs, that first frost comes, it reminds me of one of the most bonehead things I think I've ever done in all my life. It was February, and it was one of those weird February days where it just like, bro, summer's here. Man, it was warm out, and it was pretty, and we all like to get out then because we've been in the house for so long in the winter. And so I went outside, and I thought, I'm going to use this opportunity, this beautiful day. I'm going to clean up my yard, man. I'm going to get all the sticks and all the junk that's fallen through the winter, get it all cleaned up on this beautiful day. Spring comes, man, I'm ready to go. And so I went out in the yard and started picking up all these sticks. I had brought this, I've got this portable fire pit. I brought it out into the yard, and I'm throwing all the sticks in there. I'm going to burn them, get rid of them all. And so I light it on fire, and I notice every once in a while an ember will come out, and it'll hit that dormant grass, and it just catch on fire. And it was no big deal because I just take my foot, and kind of get it out and take care of it. And he just kept going. And then all of a sudden, man, it happens like this. Firemen tell you about how quick it happened. It just started getting out of control. And I wasn't able to get it out with my foot. It was getting beyond me. It was getting bigger. It was moving toward my house. Bothered me a little bit, but I got a brick house. What really bothered me, it was moving toward my neighbor's wood garage. And I'm going, what is I going to do? And I'm running and I realized I'm not going to be able to get this out. And so I ran to my house. I grabbed the hose, and I realized that I had not taken the hose out in the winter. And so the freezing and the thawing, it had cracked the hose. And so I couldn't squeeze anything to get water out. And I don't know how I did it, but I was just throwing water from the cracks of the hose. And somehow, by the grace of God, that fire got out. And I think about that every spring. I learned two things I'll never do again. Number one, I will never leave my hose out in the winter. And number two, I am not going to burn sticks on dormant grass ever again. Because you and I know this. We know this. Check this out. We understand this. We know that water extinguishes fire, okay? But did you ever hear this? That fire can extinguish water. And we're going to learn that in our lesson today. As we dive into this idea of these Old Testament stories that our kids color for us when they go to Sunday school class, Kids, Crayons, and Truth. These stories in the Old Testament where we hear certain things, but when we dive down deep into the heart of the story, we start to see things that are truths that maybe adults need to hear. And what we're going to hear here in today's story is about a guy named Elijah who asked God to send down fire from heaven that would extinguish water. It's an incredible story. It's told to us in 2 chapters of the Bible. I find that interesting because the story that I'm about to tell, if you've got any church in you at all, you know about it. But it's only covered in 2 chapters of the Bible. It's 1 Kings chapters 17 and 18 are the story that I'm going to unfold for you today. And it's all about this guy named Elijah. Now, I think there's probably a little bit of backstory that are important to understand. And so let me talk about a few things relative to what was happening before we get to chapter 17, and then it's going to make sense to you a little bit. God knew that when he got his people out of Egypt and he took them to the promised land that was known as Canaan, God knew that when they arrived in Canaan, they would be compelled and interested in the gods of those people. God knew that would happen. He knew that when they got into the new land, they would be enamored by the things they were doing. And so God was very concerned about that. That's why God said, don't marry them. When you get there, do not marry them because you're going to be enticed by them and enamored by the culture of that world. And he was very, very concerned about it. John told us last week in his sermon that there were over 2,000 gods that they worshiped in Canaan. And the Lord knew when my people get there, they're going to look at them and they're going to be enamored by it. And God was concerned about it. So he said, stay away from it. And they didn't stay away from it. And they got caught up into that culture of all those gods, and it started causing some major problems with the Lord. His people were following godless cultures. One of the gods of that day, in fact, it's one of the most mentioned god in the Old Testament of the Canaanites. The name of the god was Baal and Asherah. Once in a while, you'll see that, and you'll hear somebody pronounce it Baal. And some people say Baal. I don't know whether it's Baal or Baal, but I'm pretty sure you don't need to know that to go to heaven. And so we're just going to go with Baal. And Baal was the male counterpart of this relationship, and Asherah was the female part of this relationship. And so Baal and Asherah were gods that kind of went together, and they were known as the gods of fertility and rain. Now, let me tell you how this worked, and I'm going to tell you something that happened about this type of religion that they believed in, and it is crazy town, okay? Crazy town. I want you to hear this. If you got a kid here that's under the age of, let's say, 10, close their ears up. Watch this. They believed that because they were the gods of fertility and rain, that in order for it to rain, this is what they believed, that Baal and Asherah had to be intimate with each other. And so if Baal and Asherah were intimate, it would rain. It was as simple as that. That was their religion. But here's the crazy part of it. Watch this. In order for Baal and Asherah to be intimate, they had to be excited by the worshipers of Baal who would go to Baal temples and have intimacy with Baal prostitutes. And so you went to church as a male and you actually were intimate with a prostitute in a temple, and that excited Baal and Asherah, and they became intimate, and it rained. Now, will you let that get down in you and think about that for a second? Can you just kind of let it soak in there? So you're sitting there having dinner with your wife, and everything's cool, and she says, I'll tell you what, you better enjoy this meal. Man, the fridge is about empty. The drought is killing us. I don't know if we got any more food. This might be the last meal. He said, no problem. I'll run over to the temple, take care of business. It'd be raining tomorrow, okay? They believe this. This was their religion. And so God says, now when you come into Canaan, do not get caught up in that. And they got caught up in it. And it becomes a major historical concern of God in the life of Israel. And God began to look, listen to this, God began to look for a man, somebody who would stand firmly connected to him rather than the cultural godlessness of the day. God said, I need somebody to be an example. I need somebody who stands on what is right. I need somebody who will connect their life to me and not be enamored to what the world does and pulls them in. And Elijah appears on the scene. And this man Elijah will now be the shining light, don't miss this, of what it means to stand with God when the culture around you is abandoning him. Does that sound familiar to anybody in the room? And so Elijah shows up to be the guy. I love the way he is introduced. Chapter 17, verse 1. Look at it. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead. Now, you and I probably read that and we just kind of cruise right on by, don't even know what that was about, but there is powerful stuff right here. Watch this. We don't know where Tishbe in Gilead was. We don't know where it was. We don't have any records of Tishbites. But when this major character shows up in the Old Testament, God introduces him as Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead. Why did he say that? Because apparently it was an insignificant place where there was a band of small, insignificant people, and God reached down in the midst of that and pulled out somebody who would be a shining light of faith. I love the way Dr. Albert Moeller from Southern Baptist Seminary wrote about this. Look what he said. You can be called by God even if you're a nobody from nowhere who's done nothing extraordinary. Don't you love that? Because we tend to think that if God is going to use somebody, if God's going to raise somebody up and you're going to have a major, powerful influence in the kingdom of God, we think that God will look for the most talented among us. He doesn't. The reason that he doesn't look for the most talented among us is because if he did, the talented would think they accomplished it in their own power. And so he goes to Tishbe and looks for Tishbites. And that's why, exactly why, when you think about that throughout the biblical narrative, that's why when he needed somebody to take out Goliath, who'd he choose? Scrawny little boy named David. When he needed a woman to usher in the Son of God, who'd he choose? Humble little teenager, hadn't been even married. When he needed some guys to form the foundation of the movement of the church who would advance the cause of God through history of all humanity, who'd he choose? Uneducated fishermen. See, God looks for Tishbites. And that's why what I'm about to share with us about Elijah, why that is so important to every person in the room. Because the reality is that when God looks for somebody who will stand up and say, I am connected to him unashamedly, even though the culture is abandoning him, God will say, everybody here can potentially be used by him. See, you might be the one that he needs in your family to do it. You might be the one at your work. You might be the one where you go to school. You might be the parent where your children are involved in baseball leagues and dance teams. You might be the one. And the tendency among us, I know it because I'm one of them, listen, is that we hear that and say, oh, bro, you don't know, man, I'm just a Tishbite. And God says, perfect, that's what I'm looking for. And so Elijah is a chosen figure for a reason, because we're all like him. And so we dive in to his story. And we find out that Elijah is center stage of what it looks like for a person when they say, I will stand with God, even though I live in a world that is abandoning me. And so Elijah becomes that picture, and I want to show you some ways that he did it. And I'm going to be quick. We're not going to be real long here. I want to be quick. You've heard me say that before, and that's always, give me some grace, okay? I haven't preached in 3 weeks, bro. We're going to be here till about 11 tonight. So I want to show you some things about, y'all going, you'll be here till 11, but I don't know about me. So let me show you some things about his faith. And I want to talk about these because they're really cool. One of those, when you can see his story, is that Elijah was visionary. And so God may call you to a faith. I want you to hear me on this. God may call you to a faith in your setting that needs you to be visionary. Now make sure you understand what I mean when I use the word visionary. What I mean by that is a visionary faith has the ability to see what's going on right now and look down the road and see the consequences if we continue to do what we're doing now. That's visionary faith. And so in the story, Elijah goes up to the king of the Israelites by the name of Ahab. Ahab, listen, who's bought into Baal. Now, don't let that just kind of float in the air. Let it come down and mess with you a little bit. The leader of a nation that is supporting a direction away from God. The leader is doing this. And so Elijah shows up to Ahab, and he basically says this to him. Bro, if we keep doing this, some bad stuff is going to happen. And here's what he told him. He told the king this. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. It is not going to rain. Look how ironic this is. They were worshiping a religion now that specialized in rain. He said, it ain't going to work no more. It's not even not going to rain. Look at this. There's not even going to be wet grass in the morning. None of that's going to happen. And what Elijah is telling him is he's saying that if we continue to do what we're doing right now, down the road, there will be consequences that are far beyond anything we ever want to face. They followed the culture of Baal, and so a famine was going to come and was going to threaten their very existence. It reminds me of a quote that I gave you a few weeks ago. You know the road you're on. Are you going to be happy when you get there? Visionary faith sees that and says, we're not going to act like that. I thought about an application of that. It's kind of goofy, but it really is an application to it. Susan and I went with me. We went to one of the most ultra-conservative Christian colleges in America. Unbelievably conservative in their godly core values. In fact, before we got there, a few years earlier, they had on their campus an 18-inch rule. Boys and girls could not be within 18 inches of each other. And if you were within 18 inches of each other, there were consequences you had to pay. And so when we arrived, they didn't have that. They didn't have that rule anymore. We had gotten a little bit past that, and you could actually be with somebody that you were dating or somebody. But they did have a rule that you couldn't be in each other's dorms. Nowadays, universities have co-ed dorms. Don't think nothing about it. We could not be in each other's dorms, nor could we be with a member of the opposite sex after 10:30 at night. You just couldn't be. You do, you got all kinds of trouble. And so one night, at about 11 o'clock at night, I'm outside Susan's window talking to her in her dorm. She called me and said, I don't know if I can sleep unless I get to look at you one more time today. And so I said, baby, I'm gonna get in trouble. She goes, I need it. So I went over there, So I got caught by her dorm mom. And her dorm mom said, Hastings, that's a $25 fine. And so you do that, you gotta pay $25. And I said, I ain't paying no $25. And I never paid it. So graduation day came. Susan and I graduating on that day. And somebody of an administrative nature went up to Susan and said, hey, you can't go up there for graduation until you pay $25. If there's a $25 fine on your account. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, it actually was Dave's, but he would never pay it. We knew you were going to get married, so we put it on your account. And you can't graduate unless you pay $25. So she paid the $25, and I've been paying interest to her for 42 years, ever since. Because there are consequences to behavior, right? There's consequences to that, and that's visionary faith. That's visionary faith to be able to look and say, if we continue to do what we're doing today, then this is the trouble we're going to be in tomorrow. And Elijah did that. He was a faithful man in a culture that was abandoning God. And he had the nerve to stand up and say, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. God may very well need you to express your faith in that way in your setting right now. Now, look at the story because it then begins to expand into the rest of what's happening here. And I see there that Elijah's faith became very, very fearless. And when you dive back into the story, you start to find that again. The famine now has been going for 3 years. And man, things are tough. And so one day, Elijah and Ahab, the king, meet up with each other. They come face to face with each other. They hadn't talked since Elijah told him, dude, you keep supporting this, and this is what's going to happen. And 3 years later, nobody's got any food, famine, terrible, horrible stuff, and Elijah and Ahab run into each other. I want to see what Ahab said to Elijah. Look at this. When Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you troubler of Israel? Ahab was saying to Elijah, we're in the mess we're in because of you. You caused this, Elijah. Look how Elijah responded. I love this. I've not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed the Baals. Now listen very carefully. When you decide to stand for God in a culture that abandons him, they will blame you for the problems of the world. They'll say it's our fault. They'll say we're wrong. They will cancel us out of their life. And you and I have to rise above that and not be afraid about it. Listen to me, Christian people. We're living in a culture today where our problems are being blamed on us. And we're not the problem. We're not the problem. And don't be afraid of that. Don't let that buckle you down and be afraid of that. I remember Tim Tebow, incredible athlete, founder of Night to Shine, incredible Christian man, was asked one time in college where he went to school in the University of Florida. They said, how do you deal with peer pressure as a Christian living on a pagan campus? And he responded, what are you talking about? I'm the peer pressure, bro. I'm the peer pressure. See, if you stand for God, the culture that abandons him will put a bullseye on your back, and it'll be where you work and at a ball field and sometimes even your own home. And they'll tell you you're crazy, you're out of touch, and fearless faith will not buckle then. It will not buckle. And so if you're in a setting right now, wherever that is, and you just feel, man, I'm the only Christian here. I'm the only one standing up for what's right and godly. I'm the only principled person in this circle right now. Let me tell you what we need you to do. We need you to keep talking about it. Don't be fearless. Don't be fearful. Don't back away from that. Faith that stands up in a culture that abandons God is a faith that is not afraid. Let me show you another one. Elijah's faith was very consistent. This is in my wheelhouse here. I think if I died today and somebody didn't have anything going on, they looked at every sermon I ever preached. That's probably in about 75% of sermons I ever preach. It's something about sticking to it that is important in the Christian faith. You go back to the story and we find that Elijah got the people of Israel together. And so after he told Ahab, no, bro, you're the problem, he then went and got all the Israelites together, and he said something to them that is dramatically important. It comes up in the 18th chapter in the 21st verse, and look what he said to them. These are the Israelites. These were the people, okay? He said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. Now look at that word waver. That's a really weird Hebrew word. Sometimes it means to limp. It has to do with movement of the body. And sometimes they used it when somebody was limping. Sometimes it's used when somebody skips around something. They come up a tree and they walk around the tree. It's used often for pause. They just stop. And it seems what's happening here is when Elijah is talking here, he's talking about people who they just aren't really sure where they want to be. And so maybe they're over here and they're participating in whatever, and I don't know if that's it, and maybe it's over here, and I'm not real sure about that, and I don't know. And one day, watch. One day I'm with Baal, and one day I'm with God. And I'm never sure what team I'm on. And so I'm going from back and forth and back and forth. And Elijah challenges that. He challenges godly people, in our context, Christian people who will stand with the Father even when the world is abandoning him. And watch this. We will stand and we will stay. We will not waver back and forth. We will not go from Baal to the Father. I think the secret sauce of Christianity has always been consistency. I really do. You align your values to the truths that are taught in the Word of God, and you stick to them. You use your life in service to other people, and you resist the temptation to think that other people ought to serve you. You get in the habit of corporate worship, and you don't let anything compete against that. You're generous with your finances so that the kingdom of God can advance, and you don't stop that financial practice in your life. See, everybody can do those things. Not everybody keeps doing those things. And so you might be somebody in the room right now, and you're saying, Dave, man, I want to be one of those people, man. I want to stand up. I want to connect my life to God. I want to be firmly convinced that he's the one to follow. I want to do that in a world that is abandoning him. But in your setting, when you think about it, you think, bro, one day I'm with him and one day I'm not. And one day I'm doing the right thing and one day I'm doing the wrong thing. And one day I'm serving people and one day I want them to serve me. And one day I'm doing this for the Father, and the next day I don't get around to doing that. And I'm just pausing all the time. Is this what I want to be? Is this what I want to be? You want to be a faithful person in a world that is abandoning God. We need you to be consistent. And so I want you to just get heavy with that for a second, okay? I want you to really get heavy with it for a second. I just want you to think about this. Is there any area in your life where you haven't been consistent? Where one day you're on, one day you're off? Is there anything in your life that you need to become more consistent? Man, Elijah had that covered. Let me show you one more. And this is the one where I think the whole story reaches its pinnacle. And that is that Elijah's faith was radical. Now, I wouldn't plan on telling you that, but let me say this. I dealt with this whole sermon over the last probably 3 weeks, just kind of thinking about it, and I started writing yesterday, and I spent most of my day writing, and I stopped about right here, because when I came to this one, I knew that is the heartbeat of everything we're talking about. And so it took me most of the day to kind of work through how I want to challenge you about this. And I've got to let my hair down, and I want to be real with you for a few minutes. I want you to hear my heart. I want you to see my mind, and I want to explain to you why I think this is such a big deal. I turned 64 years old this week, and my granddaughter told me I was 46, and I said, thank God you have dyslexia. So I turned 64 this week, and I know that's getting up there. I know that. And through the years, I've had some spiritual mentors who are a little bit older than me. And they told me years ago when I was much younger, they said, start paying attention to the later years because something will happen to your preaching when you get older. And I've always known that, but I didn't really know what that would be. What would be different in my preaching? And so there are signs that I look for that I'm getting older when I preach. You remember those silly little, you know when you're getting old things? Remember those things? You're getting old when you feel like the morning after and you weren't anywhere last night. Okay, you're getting older. You sink your teeth into a steak and they stay there. Okay. You're told to slow down by your doctor, but not the police. Okay, you're just getting old. So there's things happening that happen to preachers when you get older, and I've noticed it happening to me without intention. Yeah, I look back, and it just happened over, I think, the last couple of years, and that is that I'm becoming more bold without intention. But I look back at some of the things that I've written and some of the things that I've said, and I've said and written things that I would have filtered out in earlier years, and now they just come out. And I don't know if that means we lose our filter. I don't know what that means. I just noticed that I am more truthful than I was in the past. So a few days ago, I'm sitting in a hot tub at a hotel that we love to go to. It's one of our favorite places, and they got a giant pool and a great big hot tub, and I love hot tubs. And I'm sitting in this hot tub. I'm all by myself. And a guy comes in the hot tub who's about, my guess is maybe 15 years older than me. So this guy comes and gets in the hot tub and sits about 5 feet away from me. So 2 old guys sitting in this hot tub. Now, I know that's just messed you up right there, okay? but get over this, okay? So we start to have small talk with each other. You know, where are you from? Where are you going? What are you doing? That kind of stuff. And out of the blue, this guy says these words. I'll tell you what, if I ever meet my maker, and I interrupted him, a total stranger, I completely interrupted him, and I said this to him, oh, you're going to meet your maker. And he was kind of taken back by that. And then he kind of went ahead with his statement. If I ever meet my maker, he said, I'm going to ask her what it is with my back. It hurts all the time. And I said to him, it's Adam and Eve's fault. And he said, I don't know about that. I think it's the design flaw from the Creator. And so I said this to him. Well, let me tell you a couple things. When you meet your Creator, you will find out that He had no design flaws, and He is not a she. Don't clap for that. Almost got murdered. Don't clap for that. And so he changed the subject real quick and then took off. And I sat there going, what in the world did you just do? And I have found myself in preaching settings being bolder than I've ever been. And I think maybe that's probably a good thing. I don't know. So I'm going to be bold with you. I'm going to lay the truth on the line. I want you to hear me on this. It has been my experience that one of the problems that we're having among Christians is that there are too many of us nowadays who are unwilling to be radical with our faith. We don't want to be radical about it anymore. We want to kind of dip into the pool, but we don't want to go full bore in the pool. And one of the struggles I've seen us have as a church, Big C, and sometimes us as a church, Little C at Eastside, is there's not enough people to be radical. Wilbur Reese wrote a poem a long time ago. It went like this: I'd like to buy $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my soul or disturb my sleep, just enough to equal a cup of warm milk or snooze in the sunshine. I don't want enough of God to make me love an enemy or pick beets with a migrant. I want ecstasy. I want transformation. I want the warmth of the womb, not a new birth. I want a pound of the eternal in a paper sack. I'd like to buy $3 worth of God, please. And that's where we're at, bro. So now it's okay to tiptoe our faith instead of swimming to the deep end. And I'm going to believe in God, but man, I'm not going to read directions in his Bible all the time. I'm going to be a good moral person, but I'm not going to leave every vice on the table. I'm going to go to church, but not every week. Are you kidding me? I'll pray when I need something. I hope my neighbor goes to heaven someday, but I'm not going to talk to her about it. I'll give it a little money in the offering, but I'm not doing that crazy tithe thing. I'm going to be the nice guy at work as long as they don't cross me. I want $3. I want $3. And that's enough for me. So Elijah shows up and gets radical. And he gathers the prophets of Baal together. Listen to this, 850 of them. And he said, let's see who really is God here. 850 to 1. Now, don't miss that little numerical part of the story. I think it's a powerful thing to think about. God is never, ever afraid of being in the minority if the majority is wrong. That doesn't scare him. And so Elijah gets the prophets together and he says, let's do this. Let's put a sacrifice on the altar and let's call upon our God to bring fire down from heaven and consume the whole sacrifice. And Elijah said, I'll let you guys go first. And so the 850 build an altar, they put the wood together, they throw the sacrifice on top, and they start to plead with God all morning long, all the way to lunchtime, begging for Baal to send down fire. Nobody answers, nobody hears, nothing happens. At noon, this is what Elijah says. Check this out. Shout louder! Surely he's a God. Perhaps he's in deep thought. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and has to be awakened. Now, of all the thing about Elijah that I want us to adopt, I would say maybe we ought to be careful about this. I don't know that God is calling us to be sarcastic to our enemies. Unless that's your spiritual gift, and then rock it out, bro, okay? But I don't think that's the example. And so they spend the rest of the afternoon up until the evening crying for Baal to answer and send down fire. Nothing. Nobody hears anything. Nothing happens. Elijah says, let me try. And Elijah builds his own altar and throws the stone and the wood all together. He puts a sacrifice on top of the altar, and he does something I think that the 850 must have dropped their jaws. He got 4 great big jars of water, and he started pouring them all over the wood, all over the sacrifice. He built a trench all the way around the sacrifice. He did it once. He did it a second time. He did it a third time. 12 large bottles of water, everything soaked. The trench is filled with water. And Elijah looks up into the heaven and he prays one time for God to respond. And 1 Kings 18:38 tells us this. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also, come on, baby, licked up the water in the trench. Sometimes fire distinguishes water if you are the power of God. Now, what's all that mean? The story ends with the Israelites choosing, Elijah, we will do what you did. We will stand and connect ourselves to the Father in a culture that is abandoning him. We are with you. And they took those 850 rascals and they killed every one of them. Now listen, this is beautiful. As soon as they died, started to rain. So let me ask you something. Come on now. Could it be is there the slightest possibility that God has an abundance of blessing with your name on it, waiting to pour that blessing in your life all over you, but he's just waiting for one thing to find out. Will you be radical? Or are you going to settle for $3? It's time to be radical.